Okay, so continuing from our last video, we did our second pass, and now we're going to increase the amount of detail on the skin using a higher subdivision level. So let's make a new layer. Let's give it a name, and we'll call this one our third pass. I have the other layers all locked just so I don't accidentally sculpt on those layers. And over here in the multi-resolution tab, I'm going to add a new top level. So now, as you can see here, I'm up to 1.2 million polygons for this object. So let's make a start on this new geometry here. So again, I've got my mud brush selected, and I will go into here and just start to use those indications from the previous sculpt where I'm going to place my new sculpt layer pass. And one thing that's important here is, if you note the way that I'm actually brushing across, it's very easy for me to, for example here, just go along this line and brush along this line here. What I'll get by doing that is just something that's really flat and uninteresting in terms of detail. So whenever we're doing this, you'll notice that I'm moving across ridges all the time. I may build up a ridge by doing an initial pass like this, then smooth that ridge out, and then go across that ridge for the detail. So let's continue, and I'm going to just move across these areas here, and don't be afraid to just go over those borders just to add more detail. Again, although we've got our reference here, it's a little bit of artistic license here to modify that, as we're not following a brief from a client here. We're just working on this actual model and just having a little bit of fun with it. And one thing that's important here is look for those opportunities where we intersect areas of the underlying structures. It's all about overlaps and areas that neatly fit into one another. And what I mean by that is, here for example, this area here is going to fit underneath this bone. This bone structure here is going to dominate this area of the model, and this area here that's moving in this direction is going to fit underneath this. So we have to show that that goes underneath this structure of the jawline. And similarly with tendons and fatty deposits on a model, we have to show that structure and how they interconnect and work together, and their order of visibility to the viewer, in that, for example, going back to this jawline, that the order of this is more dominant, and we can see this first, but this structure is like a secondary item that goes underneath here. So we have this visual cue here of structure, even though it's just all smoke and mirrors as to what we're trying to show. So previous passes that I've done, I've mentioned about placing some markers down, some information down for later passes, and we are at that stage now where we are at a later pass, and I can see all these bumps and ridges and crevices on here that I did in the previous videos. And now I'm looking at this with fresh eyes, and I'm looking at the opportunities that I gave myself or suggested at those earlier passes. Some of them I will work with, and others I may decide, no, that's not what I want to do, and change my mind on that particular one. Again, going back, we can see these areas that fold and fit together. So here we have this overlap here of skin, and this one here tucking underneath this fold there, and then just smoothing out. And again, I'll just draw your attention to these areas here where we've got this little impression on here, and these are the things that I like to keep in again for maybe another pass on this. And I will, rather than just using the smooth tool to completely eradicate those initial brush strokes that I've made, I will just tap the surface very gently and work my way through that. You can see how much detail now and all these muscles and bits of flesh that we are sort of bringing into the mix here, and it's really adding to that kind of look that we've got down there, and we're building that up layer by layer. Again, tapping that surface, keeping the edges wherever we can, because that shows the muscle. Again, I'll just undo this last little piece here that I did just to re-emphasize that point there. If you look here, you can see I have a small impression on there which I'm finding interesting. I'm seeing that overlap. So I've got this, and then I've got this kind of triangle shape here. Those are the things that I'm looking for, and then I smooth those down, and it gives me a muscle muscle network here that's interesting. It might be overkill, but remember, because we're on a sculpt layer, we can always just dial that down if it's too much at the end. It's getting a little bit too chunky on here, so I can either just soften that down and remove those from there. But what I do want to do here is bring in a connection, a piece of skin to connect this area here. So I'm going across and connect it to this arm here. So I'm just going to connect that there. And if this arm, you imagine it moving backwards and forwards as it would do, we would have a lot of creases here, because it would have to, when it's coming backwards in this direction, it would be creasing up, and then if it was moving forwards to grab or to hold, then it would need that extra piece of skin there to flex and give it that ability to move. So that's why we're creasing the back of that joint here, because we're anticipating that this thing does move forwards. And we do have it's a little bit too lumpy, this forearm is here, so I will have to come back here and change this. And let's do another fold under there, connecting to this inner part of this forearm here. And then, of course, we have this bone, this impression of a bone here sticking out. And that is going to override, like the jawbone, everything else. It's going to be a very definite cue as to what that part of the structure of the arm is. It's bone mass rather than flesh. Okay, so let's move this down a little bit. It's far too lumpy there, so I'm just going to move that down and smooth that out. Yeah, that's better. So one of the things I'm probably overdoing here is, in an effort to show what I'm doing, I'm probably doing a little bit too much in terms of the structures here to emphasize points as to what I'm doing. So it's kind of doing a little bit of an overkill at this point. So let's move on and move away from that area for now. And that bony area there. And let's move up here, zoom in a little bit closer to a reference. And look at these shapes here. So I'm doing this sort of L shape from here down across. There's the L shape. Then we've got this little piece here, this one going in this direction, which is like a kind of a smaller L. And then we have this one here, moving up and moving inwards to this section. And it feels as if this is a larger area moving to the side from there, and then this piece going in that direction. Move down this way. So here's an example of where I could use the brush and start sculpting and do strokes like this. And I probably did those early on in earlier passes, but it's far too uniform. It's far too linear in the stroke. So it's not really going to work. A better approach to this, even though we're trying to describe this kind of flat area, is to go across the ridge this way. Now, one of the things to think about is the dinosaur essentially uses its mouth to not only eat the food and tear the flesh, but it also uses it to grab and hang on to something that was probably running away from it. And just like any other part of the body where you're using it, say for example you're using your hands a lot in a very manual job, that area is going to be worn quite a lot over the years as you're constantly using that part of your body. So the skin is going to get tougher, and calluses and these sort of hard skins are going to be connecting and reinforcing those areas that get used a lot. And that's why this area here would be, I think, more damaged than what it's being shown on here. It would be rougher. It would be used in such a way that it would be toughened up for holding onto that prey and tearing at the flesh. So that's why I'm not trying to make it look thin and like this one, but a little bit thicker and more worn, let's say. So let's dig into this area here. And I really like this area on the eye here, this large orbit and folds around here. So let's try and mimic that. It's going around here. Now you notice I am stroking around here just to get the shape. It's just giving me kind of like a sketched version of that. And then sketching around here just to put those areas in that I need to work on. I've already done that in the previous pass, but now I'm going over that again. And now I'll just tap, smooth that out, but keep those ridges in place. Just tap into smooth. And now I'll go over this now and cross over the top on each of those ridges. I will do that. And you can see that when we zoom out of there, we get a lot more detail. If we've gone too much, we can simply just remove some of that detail with the smooth tool. And again, we'll try to focus everything to point to the eye. It's an interesting part of the dinosaur. So I'm brushing to kind of frame the eye, and the same with these brushes that I've done across these ridges that I'm talking about, again, it's all framing that eyeball that's gonna eventually sit inside that area there. So let's continue with that, reducing the size of the brush, and just continue to put that in. And over the top of the eyelid, being a little bit more careful with this one, and maybe yet another one just there, just tapping gently around that area there. Okay, so there you can see that sort of detail in there, and we've still got these ridges, these crevices in between, and we don't really need to focus on that too much. What we can do is just make sure that we've got those nice overlaps where things feel as if they fit into each other. And I'm now removing the sharpness of this line, that original sketch line that I put around there, just so it's not too uniform. I'm just adding a couple of bumps on there just to reduce its uniformity. And same here, you can see it's a little bit like squared around there. We need to do that area where things fit together as they do in nature. And as you can see, I'm not using any of these kind of specialized brushes here. I'm only doing using a very basic brush, but it's the way that I'm brushing that gives me the impression of scales, or that tough skin, let's say, armored skin. Just looking at that area there, we have that fold, we have that one going over, and there's another overlapping inwards, which works really nicely. So let's continue this one down to mimic what's going on here. We don't have to get it 100% accurate, but anything that's kind of like interesting detail like that, it's a shame not to include it. So as I've got a ridge here, following my own technique, I'm going to just ridge across, but I've got to be careful not to make it too thick. Again, those edges just need to be broken very slightly. And let's continue this one down here and let it dissipate into this flattened area here. Now it's not going to be perfectly flat, so I'll go in and just buckle this surface a little bit more. It's too flat and too smooth. And if we've done it a little bit too much, smooth tool and just tap the surface, not to destroy that last pass that we did. Okay, so we can see we're getting a lot more detail on there. Let's move over our reference to this side and try to work on this section here a little bit more. So we've got this really large, let's call it an L shape on here, which goes to here. So I'm just going to undo that. I was taking my eyes off the reference there and just started to do my own thing, which isn't good. So let's go backwards and move this over to here. So we've got this piece coming down, and then this one's right next to it there. And then we've got this piece that comes over the top from here down that way. Let's just move that there. Yep, so it's coming over from the brow there, down, and hitting this corner of this sort of L shape there. A little bit messy, but that's okay for now. And the head, the back of the head here is going to fold in underneath this. So I'm going to assume that this is kind of like a very hard, maybe bony mass here. Obviously we don't know for sure, but this is going to fold under that. So again, crossing over, getting those two pieces there to sort of intersect with each other nicely. And then we're up over the top into the brow section. And let's continue this around here now. So I'm going to use these previous marks and I'm going to really emphasize those now as coming in underneath this L shape that we've just made here. So they're going to tuck in underneath there and then roll around into the neck down here. So as we're moving across the top of the brow, I've mentioned this before that we don't really have much reference as to what this is. I'm going to make up a kind of a detail on the top of this. So I think I mentioned previously about how much resolution is in this front area here. We have got quite a lot of resolution in here. So I'm going to leave a lot of this as it is because I don't really need to work on that. It's quite a smooth area and I don't really want to put much detail in, but I do need to have a look at this interconnection of the brow region here with the nostril. So let's give that a little bit of work and let's just undo that and go across like this around and smoothing out very lightly. This is a little bit tighter underneath here, so let's reduce the size of the brush and and then do some bigger strokes there as it goes into the main part of the snout area. So again, larger strokes at the top, shorter strokes at the bottom because it's tight, as you can see here. And let's hold down our control key and do the same thing here, but just dig in just to push this out a little bit more. Smooth it down. If it does get to a point where it feels as if it's just too messy, then don't be afraid to go in and just smooth out that detail, because too much detail is too noisy. It leaves too much noise and you'll be guiding your viewer to the wrong areas that you want them to look at. I mean, who wants to, for example, look at a nostril? The eye is a fixed point. Probably the teeth will be an area that will be interesting for people to see, and the claws, all the dangerous areas, but the nostril isn't going to be one of those things that people really fixate on. So let's do a little bit more here. I quite like these little divots in there. I'll just punch those a little bit more, and let's make a sort of design here on the top. Again, I'm going to go with the ridged area, but I'm going to try to get these pieces to sort of fold in. Let's have a look. Where are we? So we're going over to here, bringing these ones over. And we don't want this. It's a little bit too contrasted, the smoothness of this middle part here. So I'd like to just go dig down into this a little bit more, and again fold these inwards to that area that I've just created. So I dug down and now I'm kind of brushing and folding these inwards to that area. Very sharp folding of these two halves coming together, and then that's going to kind of relax as we get closer to the snout area at the front here. Until it gets to a smoother snout at the front. So as you can see, as we're working through this now, we're getting tighter and tighter on the details that we bring in. But all that work that we did at the very beginning and those initial passes, it gave us a lot of information as to where we're going to put these high density details, and gave us some clues which were not necessarily always in the reference, but those strokes that we were doing gave us clues as to how we can interconnect the flesh and the muscles and the bones when we're working. So in the next video, we'll continue on this third pass and continue over the rest of the body. See you next time.